Let's start with the baseline, because you can't understand what's abnormal until you understand what normal actually is, and most people have never once thought about why normal is brown in the first place. It's not because of the food you eat. It's not because of some general waste color. Normal brown stool exists because of a single molecule called stercobilin, and stercobilin exists because your body is constantly destroying and recycling something you'd never guess: your own blood cells. Red blood cells live for about 120 days before your spleen breaks them down. Inside each one is hemoglobin, and when hemoglobin gets dismantled, one of its byproducts is a yellow-orange pigment called bilirubin. Your liver grabs that bilirubin, dumps it into bile, and sends it down into your intestines to help digest fat. Along the way, gut bacteria, trillions of them, working on a molecule your body basically hands them as a byproduct, converts that bilirubin into stercobilin. That's the brown you see. Every single day, your stool color is a live readout of red blood cell turnover, liver function, and bile flow, all working correctly, all at once. That baseline took decades to actually prove. The chemist who did the heavy lifting was Marc-Eli Ninke, working in Bern, Switzerland in the 1870s and 1880s, isolating and characterizing bile pigments through brutal, repetitive extraction work using literal buckets of animal and human bile, a process so foul that lab assistants of the era reportedly had to be rotated out to keep from quitting. Ninke's work laid the chemical groundwork that let later physicians realize that once you know what normal costs your body to produce, every deviation from it becomes a diagnostic clue. Green stool is also the one people panic about the most, and it's usually the least dangerous of them all. Green happens for one of two reasons, and they're both mechanical, not sinister. The first is speed. If food moves through your intestines too fast from a stomach bug, a laxative, or just a nervous gut before a big event, bile doesn't get enough contact time with gut bacteria to be converted all the way to brown stercobilin. It stays partially converted, and unconverted bile is green. Think of it like an assembly line. If you run the conveyor belt too fast, products come off half-finished. That's exactly what's happening inside your intestines during a bout of diarrhea. The second cause is diet, and this one has real historical weight to it. In the early Soviet space program, cosmonauts on prolonged missions were fed diets unusually high in leafy greens and chlorophyll-rich supplements to manage caloric density in a way that was easy to store and transport, and flight physicians documented green stool as an expected, harmless side effect tied directly to chlorophyll passing through largely undigested. You've probably experienced a version of this yourself after a big spinach salad or a green smoothie kick. Same mechanism, just less dramatic than orbiting the Earth to prove it. Black stool is actually two completely different phenomena wearing the same disguise, and telling them apart can be a matter of life or death. The dangerous version is called melena, and it comes from bleeding high up in your digestive tract, your stomach, your esophagus, the first part of your small intestine. As blood travels the length of your gut, it gets oxidized and broken down by digestive acids and bacteria, turning from red to a thick, tarry, almost sticky black, often with a distinct, sharp odor that clinicians are trained to recognize on smell alone. This isn't new knowledge. Hippocrates himself, writing around 400 BCE, described this exact tarry black stool as an ominous sign in patients with what we'd now recognize as bleeding ulcers, and physicians have used it as a red flag symptom for roughly 2,400 years since. The harmless version comes from two extremely common sources: iron supplements and bismuth subsalicylate, the active ingredient in Pepto-Bismol. Iron reacts with sulfur compounds in your gut to form iron sulfide, a black compound, and bismuth does something almost identical. A 2019 clinical review out of the American College of Gastroenterology noted that misidentified benign black stool from over-the-counter iron or Pepto-Bismol use is one of the top causes of unnecessary emergency room visits for suspected GI bleeding, meaning thousands of people every year are terrified by a color that's actually just chemistry, not crisis. The way doctors tell them apart in practice is texture and smell. Melena is tarry, sticky, and foul in a specific way. Supplement-induced black stool tends to be more uniformly dark and odorless by comparison. Red stool follows almost the exact same split personality, but with a genetic twist nobody expects. Fresh red blood in stool, called hematochezia, usually signals bleeding lower in the digestive tract, hemorrhoids, diverticular disease, or in more serious cases, colorectal cancer, and it should always be checked out rather than assumed benign. But the harmless version of red stool has a name of its own, beeturia, and it isn't universal. Only somewhere between 10 and 14% of people, depending on the study, actually turn their stool or urine reddish pink after eating beets. Why only some people? A landmark study in 2013 traced it to a genetic variation affecting how efficiently your gut absorbs the pigment beta-cyanin, the same compound that gives beets their deep magenta color. Combined with your individual stomach acid levels and iron status, people with lower iron stores absorb more of the pigment intact, so it passes through and shows up looking almost exactly like blood. It's the same molecule causing very different appearances depending entirely on the internal chemistry of the person eating it. Sound familiar? Because this is the same theme running through every color on this list. It's never really about the substance itself. It's about what your specific body does with it on the way through. Yellow stool takes us somewhere genuinely more serious, because unlike green or benign black, persistent yellow, greasy, floating stool is almost always a sign your body is failing to do something fundamental: absorb fat. This condition is called steatorrhea, and it happens when your pancreas isn't producing enough digestive enzymes, or when a condition like celiac disease is damaging the lining of your small intestine so it can't absorb fat properly, so the fat passes through nearly untouched, carrying pale, yellowish, oily stool with its stool that often floats and is notoriously difficult to flush, because undigested fat is less dense than water. The physician who first clinically characterized celiac disease in detail was Samuel G., a British pediatrician working at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, who in 1888 published a description so precise: greasy, pale, frequent stools in malnourished children that modern textbooks still credit him as the father of celiac disease recognition, decades before anyone understood gluten was the trigger. She actually recommended a bread-restricted diet based purely on clinical observation, without knowing why it worked, a full 60 years before the mechanism was proven by Dutch pediatrician Willem Karel Dick in the 1940s, who noticed celiac children improved dramatically during wartime bread shortages and relapsed the moment bread became available again. Here's the thing. That's an entire chapter of medical history, built almost entirely on watching stool color and texture change with diet, decades before a single lab test existed to confirm any of it. White and clay color that represents the most urgent categorical difference of everything on this list. White, pale, or clay-colored stool, medically called alcoholic stool. Remember stercobilin, the brown pigment from earlier? Alcoholic stool is what happens when bile simply never reaches your intestines at all, not slowed down, not partially converted, just completely absent, usually because something is physically blocking the bile ducts. In adults, that's often gallstones or pancreatic tumors compressing the duct. But the version with the highest stakes shows up in infants, in a rare condition called biliary atresia, where a newborn's bile ducts are malformed or blocked from birth, occurring in roughly 1 in every 10,000 to 19,000 live births. Left untreated, biliary atresia causes irreversible liver scarring within months. The breakthrough treatment came from a Japanese surgeon named Morio Kasai, who in 1959 developed what's now called the Kasai procedure, surgically connecting the liver directly to the small intestine to restore bile flow when the natural ducts can't be repaired. The single earliest warning sign parents are now trained to look for, thanks entirely to Kasai's work and the decades of pediatric research that followed it, is pale, white, or clay-colored stool in a newborn, a color change so critical that Taiwan launched a national infant stool color card screening program in 2004, printing a small comparison chart directly onto the pages of every baby's health handbook. And that single low-cost intervention measurably improved early detection and survival rates for biliary atresia across the entire country. Think about that for a second, a printed color swatch, taped essentially to a diaper chart, saving infant lives on a national scale. Blue or unusually vivid stool, almost always traced directly back to synthetic food dye, most famously blue dye 1, found in everything from certain sports drinks to novelty Halloween candy to, in a widely reported 2017 case, a McDonald's Shamrock Shake, where a child's alarmingly blue-green stool sent a parent to the emergency room before doctors traced it straight back to the dye load in the shake itself, passing through the gut essentially unmetabolized because synthetic dyes are specifically engineered to resist exactly the kind of chemical breakdown your body applies to natural pigments.